Welcome to Reach Your Dew Point, the podcast that explores what it takes to make your next move, whether you're thinking about starting a business, changing careers, or achieving something you've been dreaming about. I'm your host, Roy Atkinson. We'll be sharing stories from many who have found their own dew point and eliminated the barriers to their success. Listen up. You'll learn something that will help you reach your dew point. Welcome to Reach Your Dew Point. My guest for episode 1 is Rick DeBruhl. Rick is an award-winning network television broadcaster with a master's degree in media management. In nearly 4 decades spent interviewing and reporting about both business leaders and frontline employees, Rick has learned that before you can innovate, you must communicate. He's also spent much of the last 30 years covering auto racing for TV networks like ESPN, ABC, and NBC, including events like the Indy 500, and since 2003 has been the recognizable voice and face of Barrett-Jackson Collector Car Auctions. Rick has interviewed presidents, rock stars, and thousands of others, and spent nearly a decade as a consumer reporter and advocate. Rick was born and raised in Los Angeles and lives now in Phoenix, Arizona. He's been married for 44 years and has 2 sons and 2 grandchildren. He's the author of 2 books, Communicating at the Right Speed, 52 Ways to Fix Your Professional Communication Troubles, and The Insider's Guide to Media Training, 99 Tips to Survive Your Interview in the Digital Age. Rick, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure to be here.
So as you know, the content here is about reaching decision points in your life. We call them dew points. So what was your biggest dew point decision, and what were some of the factors that helped you make that decision?
You know, it's been interesting because I was thinking about this before I came on, and I thought, in some ways, I'm really not the classic person. I hear all these great stories about people who, they jump off the cliff and they boldly go in new directions, and they have this grand adventure that they leap into. A good friend of mine, started this, what has turned into a multi-million-dollar business with $4,000. And I'm like, I am not one of those people. I grew up in a household where, money was always tight, and you made decisions based on doing the right thing at the right time. And so my dew points, first off, I haven't had probably as many of them as some people potentially had. And I'll tell you, I thought a lot about them before I did that. So, but if you're asking me what my biggest one is, I spent the bulk of my career working in television news. And I'd worked at the same TV station for 31 years, and it was a great place. They treated me well. More importantly, I love the TV news business. It was just a lot of fun. But, things change, and as times change, it was time to kind of explore some other things. There were things I wanted to do that I couldn't do because I was attached to the TV station. And, I looked at the economics of the TV news business, and I thought it was changing in such a way that, maybe it was time for me to change as well. So I decided it was time to leave the TV news business, but I didn't just go, okay, I'm leaving, and put my card out there for people to pick up. I did a lot of work beforehand, but it was leaving the TV news business, and honestly, it was probably about a 2-year process before I made that jump.
What took up your time during that 2 years? What did you spend your time doing?
Well, one of the things I did was I got a master's degree in media management because I thought it might be helpful to me on the other side. Now, to be honest with you, I didn't really know what I was going to do with it. I just thought, having a master's degree would be helpful, and in a management area. I actually, going back to how I'm not the perfect person to talk about those great leaps of faith. I actually had a false start on my dew point about a year earlier before I left the TV station, which is I took a job with an organization, a racing organization, to be their broadcaster, their play-by-play guy for their racing series. And I took the job and literally, and I gave my notice at the TV station, and the guy I worked for, the news director, said, well, it's, we're in the middle of stuff. Let's just kind of set it aside. And because you're not leaving for a few months, we'll deal with it, in a few weeks. And about a week later, I found out that the racing series that I was going to go cover and be a part of and be their play-by-play guy for, ESPN, was going to fold into another racing series. And so suddenly the job that I had disappeared in literally a week and a half. And I had to go back to my old news director and say, remember that contract we just shredded a few days ago? Can we pull that out of the trash and kind of glue it back together? So it was a great, learning lesson about how to do that in terms of, oops, okay, make sure that when you jump off, you got a plan B. And fortunately, I had not burned any bridges. So I was able to go back and get my old job back. But it also kind of prepared me for what I was going to do the next year. And so going back to what did I do? How did I prep? I got a master's degree. I began to look around and think about what is it that I really wanted to do. I'm a big believer in steady paychecks. And so I ended up taking a job as a chief communication officer for an organization because it allowed me to kind of change my skill set, use the skills I had, and then grow in a different direction. And I will tell you also significantly, I really wanted to become a part of the ESPN IndyCar broadcast team. And as long as I worked at an NBC affiliate, which was my old TV station, I couldn't do that. And so that was one of the big reasons for making the dew point of what was it I was trying to achieve. Yes, I wanted a good paycheck, but I wanted to do some things that I couldn't do at the current TV station. So that was a big reasoning behind that dew point.
Interesting. So you moved in an interesting direction. You had a plan B. You hadn't burned the bridges that existed between you and your job. You were able to go back and set the stage for your next move, which was...
Yeah, I have a favorite saying, and I've had this for literally decades. And my saying is that it's a foolish rabbit that has one hole to run to. I always believe you need a backup plan. The whole time I worked in TV news, at the same time I was working for ESPN and other TV networks covering auto racing. And to me, that was my backup plan. If for some reason I ever got fed up with TV news or they got fed up with me, I could go pursue racing. And at the same time, if racing became too complicated, I always had TV news. So I always felt I had a backup plan one way or the other. Same thing came true when I became a chief communication officer for an organization. I was doing racing. I had a few other projects on the side. I'm a big believer in having a plan B. Now, the important thing I always point out is just because you have plan B doesn't mean you have to take it. Just because I had an option didn't mean it was something I wanted to do for a bunch of reasons. I preferred what I was doing in my plan A, and as long as that was working for me, it was great. Now, some people will say, well, if you have a plan B, that just distracts you from your plan A and that you need to dive in full time. And that's great for some people. And I'm not one of those people. Once again, I'm a big believer in security. I've been the breadwinner for my family, my wife and 2 kids for, the whole time I was an adult. I was not comfortable jumping off a cliff and just hoping there was going to be something on the other side. I know some people have done that successfully. I know some people have done that unsuccessfully. So I'm a big believer of having that backup plan, that second hole to run to just in case. Most of the time in my career, I've never had to use it, but it's always handy to have.
Let me go back a little bit. I'm also a guy who went back to graduate school just 10 or 11 years ago and got the master's education in business. Did that open more opportunities for you? Did it help you?
Well, I think I did. I think because I went from a job where I was working in TV news and where I believe, TV news people are very capable and credible. I really hadn't managed anything. I was a manager of stories. I was a manager of a process, a manager of my life in terms of the work I did. But I couldn't say that I managed a staff of people. I had never been an executive producer or a producer who had management roles. So when I wanted to leave the organization and do management work, the fact that I had gotten a master's in media management showed that I was committed. It wasn't just something I raised my hand one day and went, hey, I'd like to try something else. It showed the people who were then hiring me that, yes, I was committed to this. And I'll also say, for what it's worth, it's more than just a piece of paper. When I went through the University of Missouri, went through this management program that they've got, and, you do learn things as you go through the process, whether it's the concept of, flattening of power or Six Sigma or whatever, all the various things you learn, whether I used each one of them or not, it wasn't as relevant so much as the fact that it helped me to, when I became a manager, having a little bit more background, even though I didn't have the personal experience, as I joke, you do actually learn something in college. And to me, it was very helpful.
I found that to be true as well. And I think if anybody's thinking about pursuing a graduate degree or completing a bachelor's degree for that matter, I think it's a very worthwhile thing to do. and certainly in terms of your next move. But one of the things you're doing now is consulting and teaching and training in the realm of communication. What led you to that, and what led you to write your first book and then another?
Well, and this goes back to another dew point. You know, I'd worked at an organization for almost a decade. I was doing ESPN on one hand, and then once again having a day job on the other, just because I believe you can never have too many paychecks. And as much as I like the organization, you know, there just comes a point in time when it's time to go. And I began to look at, okay, I'm getting, you know, towards the latter end of my career. What do I really want to do that I would find fun and enjoyable, and at the same time, hopefully profitable? And so I decided that, you know, it was time to take the skills I had learned over the last decade, combine the skills from my TV job together with the management skills I had learned and the communication skills, and go in a different direction, and also get something that had a little more variety and allowed me to control my experience a little bit better. So I jumped off the W-2 cliff and became a consultant. Of course, part of my consultant work was going to be keynote speaking, you know, and I joke, you know, this past year, I picked a really bad year to start a business where you hop on airplanes, fly around the country, and talk to large groups of people assembled in one room.
No kidding.
But, you know, but having said that, you know, I was fortunate going back to having the plan Bs and the other options, you know, where I really laid the foundation for where I am. You know, I have money in the bank. I have, you know, I'm fortunate my wife is still working. We have health insurance in her direction. So, you know, I had, you know, I'm not one of those people that jumps off the cliff blindly. I knew that if I decided to go out and do this, that I would have the ability to maintain my standard of living, which I'm a big fan of, for a period of time. Now, has it been as successful as I would have hoped, to be honest with you, this past year? No. I mean, COVID, you know, impacted me, I think, in much the same way it's impacted many small businesses. But at the same time, you know, it's been a great experience and something I'm still growing on. And I joke, if you can survive a year like we've had this past year, you should be able to grow in the future. And that's what I'm looking forward to. And as for the book, you know, that was something, you know, I'd always wanted to do it and never really had the time to do. So when I became, you know, not a full-time W-2 daytime worker, I had the time to devote to doing something like that. And the book is called Communicating at the Right Speed. And it's a compilation of concepts about how to improve communicating in the workplace. I've got 52 ideas. I joke it's one a week, so you can get through it pretty easily. But it was good for two reasons. First off, it allowed me to focus on the things that I really wanted to focus on in terms of, okay, if I was going to look at this business as a communication consultant, how can I take the concepts I have and really boil them down? So I used the writing of the book to really complete my thought process on what I thought was important. And then the other thing is, it allows you to give you some credibility when you're out there saying, well, you know, I do this and I do this. Oh, and I've written a book. You know, I'm starting a business. It becomes a calling card. And I send them out as a calling card to business people all over the country when I'm trying to convince them that, you know, I'm the person they want to hire. And it shows that not only do I talk about it, I've written about it, I've researched about it.
Yeah, you mentioned the keynote business, and I should mention to folks that we met at a National Speakers Association conference in 2019 before the pandemic in a rather humorous way that I won't go into here, but we did cross paths there and shared a couple of meals. It was fun.
Back in the days when we actually went into rooms with large group of people assembled in one place.
Exactly. Getting back to more about the dew point aspect of our careers, almost invariably other people are involved in helping us to make these decisions, like family, friends, etc. Were there other mentors that you looked to for guidance, or that you kind of modeled yourself on, or who you were thinking about and talking to during the process?
Boy, absolutely. And I'll really look at this, my most recent chapter, which is doing the communication consulting work. Before I jumped off that cliff, I put together a team of people around me. And, you know, and there are a lot of companies that want to charge you for, you know, to become a member of a networking group or a mentor group or a mastermind group. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but at the same time, I think you can assemble your own group of people around you without having to pay for that. And that's what I did. I have somebody who's a mentor in the speaking world. I have somebody who's a mentor in the communication consulting world. I have somebody else who's a mentor in kind of starting your own business world. I have a number of people that I've kind of built this cadre of people around me. And trust me, I've talked to them a lot over the last year, when things were not as good as I wanted them to be. And I'm like, well, how should I do this? Or what should I do? What's your thoughts? And having the ability to reach out, and sometimes it's just get a pep talk, to me is very, very important. So having that mentor group of people has been critical to me. I mean, one of them was the very first news director who I ever worked for in Phoenix, when he hired me for my second TV job, but first one here in Phoenix. He is a wonderful person, now retired, living in Wichita, and just a brilliant manager. He's managed both TV news operations and TV stations around the country. And even though, he's 80 years old, I listen to this guy and get a lot of advice from this guy on a regular basis. Before I jumped off this cliff, I picked his brain a lot. And I think you can do that. And you just have to look around and I'm fortunate the people that I built as my network were people that I know really well. But at the same time, I think you can do it with people that you don't know as well. I mean, I've been approached by other people over time saying, hey, will you help me? And I'm like, we're all a little vain. When somebody comes to us and said, you're smart, can you help me? We all want to go, well, of course I'm smart and I want to help you. So I think you can build it. It's hard with complete strangers, but you can do it with people that you're acquaintances with, maybe that you might not be really good friends with or super close with, but I think you can still build that network. And I think, once again, that network to me, it was critical, especially over this last year and a half.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. The ability to find people to discuss things with, to get advice from, people who may have been down the road before, is just invaluable. And I also agree that there are often people who you don't have to pay. More importantly, whether you pay them or not, they're people that you can trust, and trust is just the key to everything.
And just the ability to bounce ideas off somebody. And I mean, sometimes it's just somebody who's got a little common sense. It doesn't really matter that they've started the business that you're trying to get into. I mean, yes, you ideally you want one of those. You want people in your circle, your mentor group that have experience in the area you want to go to. But sometimes just the ability to bounce ideas off somebody is critical. And I'm really fortunate. I married my high school sweetheart, who's just a wonderful person at every level and just has so much common sense, and the ability to bounce ideas off of my wife alone, even though she's never worked in any of these areas we're talking about, has, for me, been a tremendous asset as I've been going down these roads.
People we trust have a tendency to ask exactly the right questions.
Right.
And call you out when you're doing something stupid.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And once again, just having people with common sense, I think sometimes people make mistakes because they're either afraid to ask questions or they're reluctant. And sometimes just talking to somebody outside of your little circle and going, well, what do you think about this idea? Now, as I always point out, just because you ask for advice doesn't mean you have to take that advice, but you want to listen to it, think about it, judge it, and then boil it down to, is this going to impact my decision? Maybe it's not going to change the direction I go, but it's going to change the way I go in that direction.
We talked about several of the dew points that you've been through. Do they get easier over time, or do things like age and experience and obligations that you have make them harder?
I would say they do get easier, to be honest with you. I mean, as I point out, I spent 32 years in my first career in TV news, and breaking loose from that to me was the most difficult thing. And once again, I love TV news. It's not like I had a horrible job where I hated going into work every day. I loved going into work. I loved the people I work with. So for me, it was hard for two reasons. A, I liked what I did, and B, I was reluctant because having, had the stability of a job, a regular paycheck for 32 years, it was hard to jump off that cliff, even though I was ultimately going towards another paycheck. Now, I will tell you, I'm not a guy who really changes easily. I've I had the same guy cutting my hair for 40 years. I've been married to the same woman for more than 40 years. My house I'm in now I've lived in here 18 or 19 years. The last house I was in 18 or 19. I don't change. I had the same lawnmower for almost 40 years. I've had 3 engines in it, but I've got the same lawnmower. So I'm not somebody who changes a lot. So I think long and hard about it. But having said that, it is important every now and then to make a change. And I don't mean you have to make a big, ugly change. You don't have to quit your job. Sometimes it's changing the focus within your job. But we all need that variety, that change that makes it interesting. Even when I was a TV reporter, I was fortunate in that every 5 to 7 years, as I was a reporter and an anchor, my job would change. I'd anchor a different newscast. I'd have a different reporting beat, whatever it may be. And that allowed me to stay fresh and enjoy that world for a long period of time. Now, having said that, when I got to that dew point of jumping off the cliff and leaving TV news, boy, it was pretty apocalyptic in my own brain. I really had to work hard to wrap around it. But, when I left my last job, it was much easier because I'd already been through that once before.
Rick, thanks so much for being a guest on the podcast today. I thoroughly appreciate it. And I do look forward to seeing how much that Lamborghini sells for when I catch up with you on a Barrett-Jackson auction or somewhere else along the way. It's much appreciated.
It's a pleasure. I always enjoy, talking about, the trials and tribulations of life. And I like the concept of the dew point and trying to figure out, how you make that leap.
If you'd like to know more about Rick DeBruhl, you'll find him at Rick DeBruhl, that's RickDeBruhl.com. And please do pick up his books, Communicating at the Right Speed, 52 Ways to Fix Your Professional Communication Troubles, and An Insider's Guide to Media Training, 99 Tips to Survive Your Interview in the Digital Age. Thank you to Rick DeBruhl for being our guest. And we hope we'll catch you on the next episode of Reach Your Dew Point.